Hello, Indian Creek 8th grade students. This is Mr. Roush, bringing you the third part of our Jazz Age unit, A Booming Economy. Now, our guiding question for today is, why did the United States economy grow in the 1920s? The economy didn't start growing in the beginning of the 1920s. There were some problems with the American economy. Some of the problems were soldiers returning from war, and there's a big competition for jobs. Government orders for wartime goods came to a halt, forcing many companies to lay off workers, and other companies went bankrupt. Prices rose, making it hard for workers to make ends meet. The United States was in a recession, which is an economic downturn, which lasted about 2 years. After this 2-year recession, the economy began to grow. The GNP, or Gross National Product, is the total value of all the goods and services produced. The GNP rose from $70 billion in 1922 all the way up to $100 billion in 1929. This was mostly in part to scientific management. With scientific management is when experts who study how goods could be produced more quickly. The people that studied this lowered the cost and increased productivity, which is the amount of work each worker could do. This led to mass production techniques such as the assembly line, which was first introduced by Henry Ford in his automobile factories. Assembly line methods increased productivity and cut production costs. Businesses tried to better relationships with workers. Many companies set up safety programs that lowered the risk of death or injury on the job. Some began to provide health and accident insurance. Many companies encouraged workers to buy stock in the company, where if they buy stock in the company, they have kind of a stake in the company, so if the company does well, they earn more money with their stocks. The steps the companies were taking were known as welfare capitalism, which are benefits to employees, so they are closely linked to the companies. Employees were actually more loyal to the company that they worked for if they were offered any kind of compensation like insurance or different benefits. By the 1920s, more than 60% of the homes had electricity. Consumers eagerly acquired refrigerators, stoves, vacuum cleaners, fans, and radios. As demand for these items grew, more and more of them were produced, leading to reduced production costs and lower prices. Between 1920 and 1929, for example, the cost of a refrigerator dropped from $600 to $300. These appliances transformed daily life. People did not have to spend as much time on household chores, and they had more time for leisure time. In the 1920s, successful companies joined with or purchased other competitors. So to market these national brands, businesses spent more and more money on advertising. They used propaganda techniques learned during World War I and now were used to persuade consumers to buy a particular brand. They also used newspapers or magazines that were filled with ads, and with the spread of radio, a new advertising form, the commercial, was born. With all the ads telling you to buy more and more, consumers found a new way to make these purchases, which is known as installment buying. Installment buying is where you buy a product and you promise to pay a small regular amount of money over a period of time. So if you look at this radio here, it says you can buy it for $88, or you can make payments of $2.50 each week until you pay off your radio. This allowed you to have a radio in your home while you were still paying for it. This boosted spending since they didn't have to pay everything at once. We still use installment buying with credit cards, cars, houses, and any other big purchases where you don't have enough money to afford to buy the whole thing right away. More often than not, people used installment plan to buy a new car. During the 1920s, automobile registrations jumped from 8 million to 23 million. America quickly became a car culture, in which people's lives revolved around the automobile. Henry Ford was a pioneer in the manufacture of the affordable automobile with his Model T, which was built using assembly line methods. The car was sturdy, reliable, and inexpensive, and available only in black. In 1914, Ford, to keep his workers happy, was paying them a high wage of $5 per day. This allowed families to purchase his cars since he lowered the price to less than $300. By the mid-1920s, other automobile models challenged the Model T. General Motors cut into Ford sales by offering a line of cars with a range of colors and features to improve passenger comfort. In 1927, Ford responded with the Model A, which had been better engineered and came in several colors. Out of the competition came the practice of introducing new car models each year, which they still come out with these days. The automobile had a tremendous impact on other American industries. Americans' love of driving called for new roads and highways. Highways, in turn, needed gas stations and rest stops. Businesses along major roads profited from the millions of people now traveling around the country by car, and tourism grew dramatically. The car boom also affected other industries that made products used in cars. The steel, rubber, and glass industries grew. During the 1920s, the oil industry shifted from producing lubricants to refining gasoline for automobiles. The automobile drastically changed the lives of many Americans. Travel for pleasure became a regular part of American life. People could now go wherever they wished. Cars contributed to the spread of the suburbs. Because people could now drive to work, they could live in a suburb and still have a job in the city. Now, just because the cars were flourishing doesn't mean that every industry was. Railroads and coal mining were now replaced by electricity, so they weren't using those as often. Consumers also bought synthetic fibers, so they didn't use cotton as much as they used to, so the cotton farms were having a problem. Farmers had an especially difficult time. During the war, the federal government had purchased wheat, corn, and other products, and farmers had prospered from the higher prices. When the war ended, farmers had to compete with European agriculture again. Food prices fell, and farm income plummeted. The farmers were unable to pay their debts, and many farmers lost their homes and their farms. Even with wages rising slightly for most workers, the cost of living rose more. By 1929, nearly three-fourths of families had an income below the $2,500 mark, which is the accepted level necessary for a comfortable life. So that brings us back to our guiding question. Why did the United States economy grow in the 1920s? Well, that's all I have for you today.